When a wealthy black businessman, Darius Thompson, is violently confronted by a racist passenger mid-flight, the incident sparks outrage. The airline, desperate to protect its reputation, attempts to silence Darius with a settlement offer. But things spiral out of control when evidence emerges that the racist passenger is secretly connected to one of the airline's top executives. As Darius fights back through relentless legal battles and media exposure, he uncovers shocking truths about corruption within the aviation industry, leading to an explosive courtroom showdown where justice hangs in the balance. But just as victory seems within reach, a last-minute twist redefines everything. Darius stood in the narrow aisle of the airplane, his knuckles clenched tight as blood trickled from a cut on his lip. Greg's voice thundered through the cabin, loud enough to drown out even the hum of engines outside. "You think you can just act like an animal? This is my seat," Greg spat, pointing at Darius like he was marking prey. Passengers around them shifted uncomfortably, phones held high as they recorded every moment. "Your seat," Darius shot back, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around him. "I paid for this ticket, same as you." His words carried authority, but beneath it lay exhaustion, years of being questioned, doubted, and dismissed because of the color of his skin. A stewardess stepped forward hesitantly, her hands trembling as she tried to wedge herself between the two men. "Please," she pleaded, her voice barely audible over Greg's shouting. "We need to calm down before someone gets hurt worse than this." Her eyes darted nervously toward the cockpit, where the pilot's voice suddenly boomed over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an emergency landing due to disruptive behavior. Please remain seated." The tension thickened. Darius could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on him, not just from Greg, but from the passengers watching silently, their faces unreadable behind glowing phone screens. He knew how this would look later. A black man standing tall against a white man who appeared agitated. The optics were already stacked against him. When the plane finally touched down, police officers boarded swiftly, their presence adding another layer of dread. One officer grabbed Darius by the arm, ignoring his protests. "He started it! I was defending myself!" Darius shouted, trying to make them understand. But Greg stood nearby, arms crossed, smirking with satisfaction. To anyone watching, justice had been served. Hours earlier, none of this seemed possible. Darius had boarded the plane that morning full of purpose, dressed sharply in a tailored suit that spoke volumes about his success. He flipped through documents detailing a business deal worth millions, a deal that could secure his company's future. Confidence radiated off him. He'd worked too hard to let anything stand in his way today. That confidence shattered when Greg approached him shortly after takeoff. "Excuse me," Greg said loudly, drawing attention from nearby passengers. "This seat is reserved for someone else. You'll have to move." Darius frowned, glancing at his ticket again. "Sir, I'm in the correct seat. If there's an issue, talk to the staff." Greg sneered, leaning closer. "Oh, so now you're playing dumb? Typical." The insult landed like a punch. But Darius refused to rise to the bait. Instead, he calmly repeated himself, hoping reason would prevail. It didn't. Greg's tone grew sharper, his words laced with venom. "You people always think you can push your way into places you don't belong." The verbal assault escalated quickly. When Greg shoved Darius hard enough to knock him back into the seat, something inside Darius snapped. Instinct took over. As he pushed back, defending himself against the unexpected attack, chaos erupted instantly, with shouts and gasps filling the cabin. As the altercation unfolded, other passengers captured everything on camera, including Greg whispering urgently into his phone once order was partially restored. No one knew exactly what he said, but the cryptic nature of the exchange left viewers wondering if there was more to this story than met the eye. For Darius, the stakes couldn't be higher. He wasn't just fighting for his dignity. He was fighting for his livelihood. Clients pulled out of deals after seeing viral clips of the incident, painting him as the aggressor. Friends texted cautiously, unsure what to say. Even his wife, Sarah, struggled to offer comfort without letting fear creep into her voice. "Darius, what are we going to do?" she asked softly during one late-night call. "They're tearing you apart online." Darius sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I can't let them win, not this time." His resolve hardened as he thought about all the times he'd swallowed insults or walked away from confrontations to avoid trouble. This felt different. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about proving that no amount of prejudice could break him. And so, as the hours ticked by and the reality of his situation sank deeper, Darius began preparing for the fight of his life. Whatever came next, he vowed to face it head-on, refusing to let systemic racism define his worth or dictate his future. The news broke overnight. Clips of the altercation on the plane flooded every major outlet, each one edited to show Darius as the aggressor. In slow motion, his raised hand filled the screen, while Greg's earlier shove was conveniently cut out. Anchors spoke gravely about air rage and violent passengers, their words carefully chosen to paint him as a threat. This man, identified as Darius Thompson, allegedly attacked another passenger mid-flight, one anchor said, her tone dripping with judgment. The camera panned to footage of Greg giving an interview outside the courthouse, looking distraught. "I was just defending myself," Greg claimed, his voice trembling for effect. Social media exploded soon after. Trolls descended on Darius's profiles like vultures, leaving hateful comments under every post. "Typical thug behavior," one user wrote. Another chimed in, "Why are people like this allowed on planes?" Each comment felt like a punch to the gut, but what hurt most was seeing old acquaintances share these posts without question. Even colleagues who had once praised his work now hesitated to defend him publicly. His phone buzzed constantly, not with messages of support, but notifications of new attacks. By the end of the week, the fallout hit closer to home. Clients began pulling out of deals, citing concerns about associating with someone embroiled in controversy. One client, Sarah Chen, no relation to Mia, sent an email that stung more than the rest. "Darius, I believe you're a good person, but my board thinks it's too risky to move forward right now." Every rejection chipped away at his confidence, leaving him questioning whether all his hard work would amount to nothing. Then came the letter from the airline, a thinly veiled attempt to silence him. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a note, urging him to accept their settlement offer. They promised to make the whole thing disappear if he agreed not to pursue legal action. Darius stared at the check, his jaw tightening. He could hear his lawyer's warning echoing in his mind. "They'll drag this out, Darius. You're going up against a billion-dollar company. Do you really want to risk everything?" But something inside him refused to back down. Sitting alone in his office late that night, he thought about his father, who had worked 2 jobs to put food on the table, only to be passed over for promotions because of his race. He thought about his mother, who taught him to stand tall even when others tried to knock him down. And he thought about the countless times he'd swallowed insults or walked away from confrontations to avoid trouble. "Not this time. I'm not doing it," Darius told his lawyer firmly during their next meeting. "If I take their money, they win, and I can't let that happen. Not for me, not for anyone else who's ever been treated like this." As the lawsuit progressed, Darius's legal team uncovered emails between Greg and Diane Monroe, a high-ranking executive at the airline. The exchanges revealed a sinister plot, staged footage, coordinated efforts to discredit Darius, and instructions to frame him as the aggressor. But the bombshell came when they discovered Diane was married to Senator Howard Monroe, a vocal advocate for anti-discrimination laws. The hypocrisy was staggering. How could someone pushing for equality be complicit in such blatant racism? Further investigation exposed an even darker truth. Greg wasn't just a random bigot. He worked for a private security firm, contracted by the airline to handle problematic passengers. The term sent shivers down Darius's spine. Problematic. That's what they called anyone who didn't fit their mold, anyone who dared to assert their rights. It wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who looked like him, who sounded like him, who lived like him. For the first time, doubt crept into Darius's mind. Could he really take on a system this corrupt? These weren't ordinary adversaries. They were powerful, connected, untouchable. He spent hours pacing his living room, replaying the evidence in his head. "What if we lose?" he asked Sarah one evening, his voice heavy with uncertainty. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes steady. "Then we'll still have fought. Sometimes winning isn't the point, Darius. It's about making them see us." Her words reignited something in him. If no one else would expose the truth, he would. He decided to go public, releasing the emails and other damning documents to journalists. Within hours, headlines shifted. "Airline executive linked to racist. Plot against passenger," one read. Calls poured in from reporters eager to hear his side of the story. For the first time, Darius felt a flicker of hope. That hope wavered when Jamal confessed. Darius had known Jamal since college. The man had been his business partner, his confidant, his friend. So when Jamal admitted he'd accepted money from the airline to sabotage the case, it felt like a betrayal deeper than any insult Greg could hurl. "I did it for us, Darius," Jamal pleaded, his voice breaking. "We're drowning here. This fight, it's killing us. I thought if I could buy us some time—" Darius cut him off, his voice cold. "You sold me out. To them." The weight of those words hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. After Jamal left, Darius sat in silence, staring at the empty chair across from him. Who else might turn against him? Who else might prioritize survival over justice? Just as despair threatened to consume him, Mia Chen reached out. A young Asian-American woman who had been on the flight. Mia offered crucial evidence. A video showing Greg initiating the altercation. Her message was simple but powerful. "I saw what happened, and I know it wasn't your fault. Let me help." Gratitude washed over Darius as he listened to her recording, the truth finally captured in full context. Mia didn't stop there. She launched Nostra Justice for Darius, rallying thousands online to support his cause. Tweets, posts, and petitions spread like wildfire, amplifying his story far beyond what he could have imagined. Strangers shared their own experiences of discrimination, tagging Darius in heartfelt messages of solidarity. For the first time since the incident, Darius felt less alone. "You've started something bigger than yourself," Sarah said one night, scrolling through the hashtag. "People are listening, they're watching, and they're standing with you." Darius nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he believed they might actually win. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, a low hum of whispers filling the air as people craned their necks to catch a glimpse of Darius sitting at the plaintiff's table. His hands rested on the polished wood, fingers tapping lightly in rhythm with his racing thoughts. Across the aisle, the airline's high-powered attorneys shuffled papers, their confidence evident in every movement. The judge entered, and the room fell silent, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Witnesses took the stand one by one, each testimony adding layers to the unfolding drama. A passenger named Linda recounted how Greg had shouted slurs and lunged at Darius first. "It wasn't what you saw online," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the opposing lawyer's attempts to rattle her. Another witness, a flight attendant, described the chaos in vivid detail, how Greg's aggression escalated until it became impossible to intervene. But it was the airline executives who drew gasps from the gallery. When questioned about policies, Targeting problematic passengers, they dodged answers with practiced ease. "We aim to ensure safety for all," one executive stated blandly, avoiding eye contact with both the jury and Darius. Their evasiveness only fueled skepticism among those watching. As the trial progressed, flashbacks painted a fuller picture of Darius's life. Testimonies revealed his childhood in inner-city Detroit, a place where opportunities were scarce, but dreams weren't. Friends spoke of his relentless determination, how he worked 2 jobs while studying late into the night just to get ahead. Colleagues shared stories of subtle yet persistent discrimination. Promotions denied, meetings dismissed, ideas stolen and credited to others. Each story added weight to the case, showing that this wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a pattern. Then came Diane Monroe. She strode to the witness stand like someone accustomed to command, her tailored suit and poised demeanor exuding authority. Her answers were rehearsed, her denials smooth. "I assure you I had no knowledge of any conspiracy," she declared, meeting the eyes of the jury without flinching. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was this fight futile? That changed when Darius's lawyer presented the incriminating texts between Diane and Greg. "Explain these messages," the lawyer demanded, sliding printed copies toward her. Diane's composure cracked almost instantly. Her face paled as she stammered, trying to deflect blame onto Greg. He misled me," she faltered, her polished facade crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence. The judge called for a recess shortly after, leaving everyone unsettled. In the hallway outside, Greg paced nervously, running a hand through his thinning hair. Reporters hovered nearby, cameras clicking incessantly. He glanced around furtively, clearly unnerved by the mounting pressure. Fear gnawed at him, not just fear of jail time, but fear of being exposed as complicit in something far bigger than himself. By the end of the day, Greg couldn't take it anymore. Cornered emotionally and legally, he broke down during a private meeting with his own attorney. "I didn't know it would go this far," he muttered, tears streaming down his face. Confronted with the reality of prison, he agreed to testify against Diane. "She used me," he confessed bitterly, "said I'd be doing my duty, protecting the airline's image. But it wasn't supposed to ruin lives." Back inside the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. With Greg now set to testify, hope began to tilt back in Darius's favor. His legal team exchanged quiet nods, sensing momentum building. For Darius, it was more than vindication. It was validation. Every insult endured, every door slammed shut because of the color of his skin, every sacrifice made along the way suddenly felt worth it. Greg's decision marked a turning point. Though the outcome remained uncertain, there was a newfound sense of possibility in the air. Justice might still slip through their fingers, but for the first time, Darius allowed himself to believe it could be within reach. As he sat quietly in his chair, listening to his lawyer strategize next steps, he felt a spark of resolve reignite within him. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It belonged to everyone counting on him to expose the truth. The courtroom fell, silent as the foreman stood, clutching the verdict slip in trembling hands. "We find the defendant guilty of racial discrimination and defamation," he announced, his voice steady but carrying the weight of history. Gasps rippled through the gallery, followed by murmurs of disbelief and relief. Darius sat frozen, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. It was over, or so it seemed. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final, echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. Later that evening, Darius sat alone on the edge of his hotel bed, staring at the check for the multi-million-dollar settlement. His fingers traced its edges absently, but there was no joy in his expression, only exhaustion. He had won, yes, but victory felt hollow when measured against everything. He'd lost, Sarah walked in quietly, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She paused, watching him for a moment before speaking. "You did it," she said gently, sitting beside him. "You took them down." Darius exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "At what cost? My company's barely holding on. Half my friends won't answer my calls, and you—" His voice cracked slightly. "I can see how tired you are, Sarah. This isn't what I wanted for us." Sarah placed a hand on his knee, squeezing lightly. "No one ever plans for this kind of fight. But look around. You've given people hope. That matters more than anything else." Her words offered little comfort as reality continued to close in. Just hours after celebrating, an anonymous tip arrived via email. Documents revealing the airline's plan to appeal the ruling and launch a smear campaign against him. They accused him of orchestrating the entire ordeal for publicity, twisting the truth into something unrecognizable. Darius stared at the screen, anger bubbling beneath. "The surface. They'll never stop," he muttered bitterly, closing his laptop with a snap. "Even now, they're trying to erase me, but buried within those same leaked files lay something bigger, a smoking gun exposing systemic racism across industries far beyond aviation. Hiring practices rigged against minorities, security protocols, targeting specific demographics, even internal memos referring to customers of color as high risk. The evidence was damning, and it spread like wildfire online. Hashtags trended globally, protests erupted outside corporate headquarters, and voices long silenced began shouting in unison. Days later, Darius found himself sitting alone in his office, surrounded by empty coffee cups and scattered papers. Memories flooded back, the late nights spent building his business from scratch, the sacrifices that strained his marriage, the friendships tested by mistrust. Tears welled up unexpectedly, blurring his vision. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and burying. If you found this story powerful and inspiring, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing for more content that challenges societal norms and uplifts voices of resilience. Your support helps us continue telling stories that matter, stories that spark change, inspire action, and remind us all of the strength we hold when we stand together. Let's keep the conversation going, because systemic racism thrives in silence, but together, change is possible. Thank you for being part of this journey,